Good afternoon. Welcome to Storytime with Pastor Jeremiah. We have a special guest with us today. Little Miss Everly After is joining us for Storytime today. So she will be hanging out with us. Hope you enjoyed this time. When I was growing up, we used to love reading stories together as a family. We would hang out and we'd read. One of our favorite series was Sam Campbell's Wildlife series. Starts off book 1 with How's Inky? And we read it to our kids. And also last summer, a couple summers ago actually, we went on a vacation up to Wisconsin and hiked the trails these stories are about, and saw the island and everything. So it's a lot of fun. Wanted to share these stories with you. During this time when many of you are staying at home to help stop the spread of the virus, I wanted to give you something to look forward to each day with a fun story time. So today's story, we're going to start the series of books called How's Inky? A porcupine and his pals offer some highlights on happiness. The intro starts like this. A book is named Inky the Porcupine. I hardly know whether to bless him or curse him. Whichever I do, he won't care a flick of his tail. He is so exasperatingly self-sufficient, so wholly complacent, he will just waddle away, climb a tree, and look down at me, saying in his most gracious grunts, "You take things too seriously, Sammy, old boy. Relax. Come on up and eat some bark." Nevertheless, wrapped up in his bequilled little hide is the grandest mixture of troubles and pleasures, worries and joys that ever came to me. Inky can get into more places he shouldn't be, chew more things that shouldn't be chewed, myself included, and claw more things that shouldn't be clawed than any other creature I have known. He is just enough bother to be adorable. Certainly he is never a bore. Nor does he let life become monotonous for anyone or anything. I love him with all my heart, and yet I wonder sometimes if there isn't just a little bit of jealousy mixed in with that love. Why? Inky is far more famous than I am. People know of him who seem to have never heard of me. And frequently I am identified only by my association with him. "Oh, you are the man who has that pet porcupine, aren't you?" Wonderful. I have no identity of my own, but as a servant or emissary of Inky, I am given standing. Once in a large city, I was walking down a busy street, watching the hustling crowd. Presently, I noticed several people in a group coming from the opposite direction, regarding me with interest. It was good to receive some attention. Sorry about that. Apparently, they recognized me. As they drew near, we all broke out with friendly smiles. Hopefully, you guys can all hear. It looks like it's going okay. One of the group stepped forward with a greeting. "Aren't you Sam Campbell?" "Yes, I am Sam Campbell," I replied warmly. Perhaps my pride had been touched a little that in all of the milling multitude I had been recognized. I listened expectantly for the man's next words. Surely there would be something quite intimate, personal, and friendly in what was to come. My thoughts were rather hungrily speculating on what he might say. That he had heard my lectures or broadcasts, or perhaps seen my pictures. At least I thought he might say something of that nature, but he didn't. "How's Inky?" he asked, in utmost interest and concern. And his whole party listened anxiously for my answer. "How is Inky? How is that porcupine?" My pride dropped to the level of the sidewalk. No concern over my health or prosperity, just Inky's. Well, at that moment, Inky was probably asleep in the crotch of a tree, dreaming of a perfect land filled with salt licks where the bark of trees, his favorite food, came in triple layers, and the length of days was doubled so he could get in more sleep. His health was all right, unquestionably, and he would just as soon hear no more about it. However, I trust in my deflated condition, I answered the question more politely than that. My solicitous friend, or rather Inky's friend, didn't know it, but he named a book that day. How's Inky? The question has been flung at me all over America. I determined to answer it permanently in print if possible. I would tell the world Inky was all right, and then perhaps I would get some attention. Inky will like the book, too. There is no doubt of that. He will look it over carefully, then methodically chew off the cover, reduce the pages to bits, and walk away grunting a criticism that there should be more salt in the ink. Well, Inky is all right. He is all right in every way. I'll have to figure out how to turn off phone calls for the next one. Sorry about that. It is wonderful to see that people can form such a liking for a little creature, but perhaps not so surprising when we discover that a little animal such as Inky is not only an object to love, but an inspiration in his character qualities. In truth, I love the love everyone has for Inky. How's Inky now, you ask? Well, Inky is fine, just fine. And if it is of any interest, I feel right good myself. Chapter 1. The Sanctuary of Wedgemond, Haven for Wildlife. Nature was lavish with the newborn loveliness of spring. Lakes still held the leftover chills of winter ice. Fingertips of green new growth were appearing on balsams. Tender leaves of aspens had begun their summer-long dance, while juneberry and cherry blossoms burst forth among the evergreens, looking like sprays of popcorn. The great forest about us seemed so alive and happy it had difficulty in expressing itself fully. Birds, back from their winter journey, were singing almost violently. Flowers were singing from the forest floor, trees were singing in the winds, stars were singing in clear night skies, and human hearts were singing with the very joy which comes with the season of new birth. Within the sanctuary of Wedgemond, springtime happiness was enhanced by a contributing factor. It was now the 5th year in which that area had been closed to hunting and trapping. The wild creatures of the region had learned of their safety. No longer were they afraid to show themselves in daylight along lake shores and in open fern patches of hillsides. No longer did they dash for shelter at the first sight or sound of man. Instead, a cautious friendliness was dawning. Deepening peace rested upon forest halls and permeated the very atmosphere. But in the midst of all this, we felt that adventure was brewing for us, and we were right. There were 3 of us at the sanctuary at the time, good old Tom Norton, Bobby, and myself. Tom Norton was the grand old gentleman who had spent his boyhood with the pioneers of Indiana. His hair was now white with the caress of years, his manner mellowed with habitual kindness and thoughtfulness, and his rich memory packed with recollections and stories everyone was anxious to hear, and which he loved to tell. He had a ready wit that kept his companions in laughter. His stories came out of his wealth of experience, his love for interest in his fellow human beings. And sometimes, accompanied by a wink and a twinkle in his eye, the stories came directly from Tom Norton's imagination. There is no harm in touching up a story a little to make it interesting, he used to say. At the sanctuary he was known as the Judge. Not that he ever had been a judge, but he looked like one, and with his fairness and fineness of character, he would have made a fine one. Everybody loved Judge Norton. Now as to Bobby, he was one of the most boyish boys I had ever have seen. He was so very much alive and alert to everything, filled with curiosity and bubbling enthusiasm. And he had that happy faculty of getting into and out of trouble constantly. The day seemed woefully empty if Bobby hadn't spilled a jar of jam in his lap, put varnish in the pancakes, tipped over the coffee pot, lost his shirt or his shoes in the house, or himself in the woods. Everybody loved Bobby, too. There is a certain wholesome promise in such a lad. Boyish boys make manly men. We 3 were quite happy living in the woods together, but actually the smoothness and ease of things gave us concern. We spoke of it, and the judge warned us not to get too comfortable and soft, that likely something would break loose soon. It wasn't that life at the sanctuary then lacked interest or it was monotonous. There just wasn't anything giving cause for worry, and that didn't fit in with our usual experiences. In times past we had such problems as the bears who liked to climb onto the roof and pull off the roofing paper, the porcupine who insisted on chewing to slivers the posts which held up our cabin, the epidemic of deer mice that literally took over our cabin, over our place, and especially loved to jump in our faces in the middle of the night, the chimney swallows that nested in our fireplace chimney one cold spring while we shivered and shook with no fire to warm us, until the little birds grew strong enough to fly away. But now, well, things were just too smooth. A bear was coming nightly to within 100 feet of our porch door to get food we placed there for him. But that was all right. He didn't try to come in. Chipmunks and squirrels were friendly as usual, climbing all over us with no fear, and little respect. Rascal, our raccoon pet of 2 years previous, was coming in nightly. But he was no trouble, for he could open the screen door for himself and come into the porch to get his midnight dinner. One night, however, Rascal did create a minor bit of confusion. We had forgotten to prepare his food. He came expecting the usual good service and did not receive it. Hence he helped himself. He opened the icebox, climbed in, and for a little while must have behaved like a fur-covered cyclone. We had been out on a canoe trip. When we returned late that night, we found the smoothness of our life had been broken for the time being, at least. What a mess we found on that porch. 24 eggs had been taken from the icebox and smashed on the floor. Rascal liked eggs in every form. He had eaten them boiled, fried, scrambled, poached, and on toast, but never smashed on the floor, so he tried that. Apparently he liked it, as he had eaten almost all of them, leaving just enough debris to decorate things properly. Bacon had been pulled out on the floor, and a bowl of gravy very carefully turned upside down. On the top shelf of the icebox had been a large jar of strawberry preserves. That had been tipped over, and the strawberries were hanging like little monkeys throughout the wire shelves below. Mustard and ketchup were in the jello, milk was spilled on the ice, fruit juice was flowing around among cold vegetables, a head of lettuce was in a dish of applesauce, and tomato juice was in everything. 2 hours' work, and the mess was cleaned up. Thereafter, food always was placed out for little Rascal. We had learned our lesson. That night, as we went to bed, we heard the judge singing one of his improvised songs to the tune of Turkey in the Straw. Oh, maybe it's the stars and maybe it's the moon, but things are going to happen, and they're going to happen soon. So climb into your beds, get all the rest you can. It won't be so very long till trouble will begin. The very next morning, it began. Chapter 2. Kindness brings returns, aplenty. We were seated at the breakfast table when word came that on a highway a few miles away a car had hit a doe. A tiny fawn, less than a week old, had been left alone in the world. Would we take it in, give it protection, and raise it? Would we? Breakfast was forgotten and we were on our way. Within 2 hours we were back, bearing in our arms our animal treasure. A tiny, spotted, now motherless fawn. Babette, we named her in honor of Bobby. Babette simply took our hearts by storm. Not one of us would ever forget those first moments when we stood looking down at her, feeling awkward and rough before her frailty, and already worried as to whether we could care for her. Her oversized eyes returned our glances without the slightest fear. Her slender legs wobbled and bent, so young was she. Bobby caught hold of her, afraid she would fall. Then she let out a weak, thin little bleat. She must be hungry. Pandemonium broke loose. The three of us jumped and started to run at the same time. One would have thought she would have starved if she was not fed within the next 5 seconds. Bobby bumped into Judge Norton. I bumped into both of them. Babette was so frightened at the sudden commotion she forgot her hunger and probably wished she hadn't said anything. A baby's bottle had been brought out, and Bobby came running with it, filled with milk, cold and straight from the can. That would never do. The milk must be warmed, and it must be diluted with an equal part of water. There was another outburst of ill-directed action, during which Bobby and I collided, spilled the milk, dropped the bottle, but fortunately did not break it, and placed another pan of milk on the stove, but forgot to start the fire. Judge Norton retreated into a corner where he wouldn't be run down and where he could laugh at our miniature riot. Finally, after what seemed an age, the milk was ready, many times tasted and tested, and Babette was presented with her first dinner at the sanctuary. She liked it right well, and never stopped until the bottle was drained down to the last drop. Then came the problem of housing our little charge. There were wildcats, bears, and wolves in the wild forest about the sanctuary. Babette was too young to cope with them. Her woods-wise mother would have known what to do to provide a measure of safety, but that protection had been snatched from her. No pen or cage was available, so we assigned to her a little sleeping cabin which stood a short distance away from our main lodge. We cleared out the furniture, built a fire in the little wood stove to take out dampness and chill, spread some old coats in a corner as a bed, and invited Babette into her new home. She walked in willingly enough, and promptly fell flat. She wasn't hurt in the least, but certainly looked embarrassed. Her chin and stomach were flat to the floor, and her legs spread to indicate the 4 points of the compass. "Get up, Babette. You look like a rug," said Bobby as he hurried to help her. Babette simply could not stand up on that floor. It had been oiled, and her little hooves could not grip the slippery boards. We stood her outside among the balsam trees while we rushed about the sanctuary assembling some fiber rugs for Babette's boudoir. Then she was invited in once more, this time entering with more success and certainly more dignity. We gave a shout of triumph as she confidently walked across the floor and promptly curled up on the bed prepared for her. "Where is all this smoothness and calm you were talking about?" Judge Norton asked later. At the moment, we couldn't remember such a condition. But we soon learned we were only beginning our new hectic experience. Babette was problem number 1. There were more coming. Suddenly the world seemed to have broken out with an epidemic of sending us orphan baby animals to raise. Not many hours had passed when a tiny groundhog or woodchuck was brought to us. It was so young its eyes had not opened as of yet. The only one of a family of 8 to survive a tragedy, we were told by the person who brought it to us. Would we take it in, protect it, and raise it? Would we? Bobby insisted this creature was to be his special pal, and that proved to be true. But what to name it? One suggested Woody, another suggested Chuck, but neither met with much enthusiasm. Finally, Judge Norton struck the right idea. "What do you generally call groundhog?" he asked with meaning. And thereupon we named it Sausage. We padded up a box as a nest for her and moved her in beside Babette. Our family was growing, so were our worries. 2 days later, from another source, came 2 little raccoons. Everyone should look upon a baby raccoon. I don't believe there would be a spark of cruelty or meanness left if this were done. The words cute and adorable are much overworked, but they should be in the human language, if for no other reason than to describe those funny, furry little fellows. Like Sausage, the baby raccoons had not yet opened their eyes when they arrived at the sanctuary, and they too were the only ones of their family to survive a tragedy. Would we take them in, protect them, and raise them? Yes, we would. And now, unwittingly, we had opened the door to an orphanage. And it might as well be full. We padded up another box for the latest comers, named them Rack and Ruin, and moved them in with Babette and Sausage. The names Rack and Ruin proved to be the most appropriate as time went on. Now let it be known that each new arrival brought with it as much excitement and confusion as had Babette, and each one brought its own problems and complications. When, how, and what to feed the baby animals, and many other cares that came up every hour of the day. And at night, in their behalf, kept us in a whirl of bewilderment. Judge Norton pretended to be much disgusted with Bobby and me because of the way we fussed and worried over our charges. Yet, in the middle of one night, when Bobby awakened and slipped down to see if the animals were all right, he found the judge sitting up with them. Then I slipped down to inspect things and found them both there. Just as we seemed to have caught the hang of things and began to feel that we were masters of the situation, the most upsetting event of all took place. Inky, the porcupine, arrived. It was the same old story. Through a tragedy, Inky had been left motherless. Would we take him in, protect him, and raise him? Would we? One look at the funny little fellow, and he was ours, and we were his. He was black as ink, hence his name, and about the size of a baseball with a tail on it. His eyes were like shoe buttons. Though only 3 days old, he was bristling with those aggravating needle-like quills, and was amazingly strong and independent. Immediately, he climbed up my arm, and under his own power settled on my shoulder, and began chewing on my ear, a habit he has retained ever since. Inky moved into the orphanage. He was assigned a box, but he would have nothing to do with it. From the very start, he was provokingly independent. While he liked us, he let us know he could do without us very easily. He made an inspection tour of his new home, looked over the other animals, and decided he was superior to everything he found. He pawed Rack and Ruin to see if they were alive, bit Sausage to hear her squeal, and with a quick move, fastened a quill in Babette's nose when she tried to be friendly. Then he waddled across the floor, tucked his head in a corner, and went to sleep. The evening following Inky's arrival, after the 5 little fellows had been fed and put in their respective nests, we slipped up to their cabin, flashlight in hand, to have another look at them. We shall never forget the picture we saw. They were all assembled on Babette's bed, snugly cuddled against her warm body, sound asleep. How Rack, Ruin, and Sausage got out of their nests it was hard to conceive, but some way, in their yearning for mothers who were no more, they had sought until they found this comfort and care. Inky, too, had left his cold, cheerless corner, and forgetting his assumed superiority, joined the little furry cluster. Let's see if I can show you the picture here. And Babette, tiny baby that she was, seriously assumed her role as foster mother. As we came in, she looked up at us with something of pride in her face. Then, even as we watched her, she licked first Rack, then Ruin, then Sausage, and started to lick Inky, but changed her mind at first contact with his quills. We were deeply moved by what we had seen. As we came back to our main lodge, Judge Norton spoke. "Now doesn't that repay you 100 times for all the trouble you've had?" It did, we agreed. I'm not sure how much we are doing for them," added Bobby, "but I know what they are doing for me. It is the first time I have realized that kindness is something you do for yourself. Boy, I feel good inside." As the judge was preparing for bed, we heard him improvise another verse for his favorite song. The mistakes in English can be forgiven in the light of the truth of his message. Oh, a man can learn to figure, he can learn to read and write, and he can learn just how to play and work with all his might. Yes, he can learn a lot of things and feel quite proud, you bet, but till he knows how to be kind, he don't know nothing yet. Come back and join us tomorrow, same time, same place. Chapter 3, Individuality, with feathers and fur and skin on it. Thanks for joining us for Storytime. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.